I refused to change my wedding date for my brother's luxury trip. So my parents boycotted it. They stood up right in the middle of the ceremony. "Maybe this will teach you humility," my dad said loudly, echoing across the room. I didn't beg. I didn't cry. But at the reception, my wife stood up, grabbed the microphone, and put a single document on the giant screen. 170 guests in the room went dead quiet. My parents' smug faces dropped. They were about to lose everything. "Thank you for being here. Grab a warm cup of water, sit back, and let me tell you the whole story." 170 people sat under warm string lights in a ballroom perched on a mountain in Park City, Utah. Champagne flutes caught the glow like tiny captured sunsets. It was supposed to be the absolute best day of my life. Chloe, my beautiful bride, was sitting right next to me at the head table. We had just finished our first dance. The band was playing a soft jazz tune in the background. The catering staff was quietly moving around, pouring wine and serving plates. Everything looked perfect on the surface. And then the room started to change. The joyful energy suddenly hit a brick wall. Conversations thinned out. Chairs stopped scraping against the hardwood floor. Even the band mid-song faded into the kind of heavy, uncomfortable hush you get right before a massive avalanche strikes. People were still whispering about the horrific scene from the ceremony only hours earlier. They were talking about how my parents had stood up and walked out like they were leaving a movie theater because they found the film boring. They didn't just slip out the back to be discreet. They made a show of it. My father pushed his heavy wooden chair back hard against the stone patio, creating a loud screech that made everyone turn around. He looked directly at me, his own son, standing at the altar in my tuxedo, and delivered his final verdict so the whole front row could hear it. My mother followed right behind him, her chin held high, gripping her expensive purse, not even glancing back at me. I sat at the head table now, my hands folded tightly in my lap, my knuckles completely white. I hadn't cried. I hadn't begged them to stay. I hadn't done anything dramatic because I had been taught my whole life that drama was what other people did. My family didn't do loud, messy drama. My family did polite cruelty with a massive side of total denial. But the truth was, my throat burned like I had swallowed a lit match. I knew exactly why they had left, and I knew what it was supposed to cost me. It was supposed to cost me my dignity. It was supposed to humiliate me in front of Chloe's family. It was supposed to put me back in my designated place. Then Chloe stood up. She didn't clink a glass with a fork. She didn't put on a fake, polite smile for the room. She just took the microphone off the stand like she was about to read the evening news and walked straight to the center of the dance floor. She looked over the crowd, and then she looked over at the heavy double doors at the back of the room. My parents had just walked back in. They had decided to return for the reception, probably to play the victims, to mingle and tell our relatives how disrespectful and ungrateful I was being. They stood by the entrance, arms crossed, looking incredibly smug and self-righteous. Chloe looked right at them. Her eyes were steady, protective, the kind of fierce steady that says she was completely ready for war. "Before we start the speeches," Chloe said, her voice echoing loud and clear through the massive room, "there's something everyone here deserves to know." My father's arms dropped to his sides. My mother's tight, fake smile instantly vanished. "You saw Nathan's parents walk out earlier today?" Chloe continued, pointing directly toward the back of the room where they stood. "You saw them try to humiliate him on his wedding day. You deserve to know the real reason why." A giant projector screen rolled down behind her. The slideshow of our baby pictures disappeared. Instead, a highly confidential legal document flashed onto the screen in bold, black letters. I watched my father's face turn completely white, draining of all color. I watched my mother grab his arm to steady herself, her mouth falling open. The room of 170 guests went dead quiet. You could hear a pin drop. To understand how we got to this exact terrifying moment, to understand why my wife was standing in her beautiful white dress dismantling my family's entire financial empire in front of everyone we knew, I have to take you back. I have to show you the deep cracks in the foundation, long before the whole house came crashing down on top of them. I am Nathan. I am 31 years old. I work as a program manager for a large education charity. It is the kind of work where you fix problems by making lists, building systems, analyzing metrics, and finding compromises instead of raising your voice. I live in Utah, close enough to my parents' small chain of luxury auto dealerships that I can drive there in under an hour, but far enough away that I can pretend the physical distance is an actual healthy boundary. Growing up, my younger brother Carter was the sun, and I was just a cheap lamp in the corner of the room. I was useful, steady, and expected to keep shining and doing my job without ever needing anything in return. Carter is 29 now. He is the guy who goes on extreme sports trips, wears expensive luxury watches, and carries that effortless, arrogant confidence that only comes from knowing someone else will always catch you when you fall. My mother, Eleanor, used to tell our relatives it wasn't favoritism. It was simply supporting his free spirit. My father, Robert, called it family priorities. I called it normal, right up until the day I realized normal was just a much nicer word for being trained like an obedient dog. I remember clearly when I got accepted into my absolute dream university. I was thrilled. I ran into my dad's office at the main Porsche dealership, holding the thick acceptance letter in my hands. He barely looked up from his stacks of paperwork. He adjusted his glasses and told me that business was tight that year, and that the college fund they had started for me years ago was heavily depleted due to market shifts. He said I would need to take out massive student loans and get a job to support myself. I didn't argue. I swallowed my disappointment. I got a job waiting tables at a busy diner, working exhausting late-night shifts just to cover my tuition and books. 2 months later, Carter graduated high school. My parents threw a massive party, bought him a brand new sports car, and fully funded a gap year for him to go backpacking across Europe. When I finally gathered the courage to ask my mother how they could afford all of that when my college fund was supposedly completely empty, she didn't even blink or show a shred of guilt. Your brother needs life experience, Nathan. You have always been so independent and resourceful. You will be fine. That was the dynamic set in stone. I was fine. Carter needed everything. Years later, when I landed my first major promotion at the charity, I called them to celebrate. I finally had a salary I could be really proud of, one that proved I was successful on my own terms. My mother spent the first 2 minutes saying, "That's nice, dear," and then spent the next 45 minutes talking nonstop about Carter's new startup idea, a vague, poorly planned tech startup that my father was heavily funding out of his own pocket. Then I met Chloe. She was a senior financial analyst. Sharp, highly observant, and completely allergic to nonsense. She saw right through my family's polite cruelty almost immediately. When we got engaged, we chose our wedding date strategically. June 21st, 2025. It was the first weekend that felt like summer had fully arrived. We booked a beautiful, highly sought-after mountain resort, signed the massive contracts, paid the non-refundable deposits, and sent out the save-the-dates a full year in advance. I made a wedding planning spreadsheet that was incredibly detailed, tracking every single dollar. When I told my parents the official date, my mother sounded almost pleased. "Oh, that is a beautiful weekend, Nathan. The mountain weather will be absolutely perfect." My father even said he would help coordinate some of the vendor planning and parking, which in my family was the closest thing to a warm hug. For a couple of months, everything stayed exactly in the lane it was supposed to. My mother forwarded vendor suggestions. My father asked about the catering menu. Carter didn't care at all, which felt like a small, beautiful mercy. Then spring finally arrived, and the fragile illusion of our happy family shattered into a million pieces. It started with a completely unexpected phone call from my mother on a random Tuesday afternoon. I was sitting at my kitchen table, my laptop open, halfway through an important email regarding our charity scholarship distribution, when her name popped up on my phone screen. "So," she said, her voice bright and chipper in that specific, dangerous way that always meant she had already decided the outcome of the conversation before it even began. Carter finally booked his big trip. I rubbed my tired eyes, looking at the calendar on my wall. "It is April, Mom, and it is an incredibly exclusive luxury package," she said, stressing the words as if I should stand up and applaud my brother's spending habits. A private chalet, VIP events, helicopter excursions. It is a once-in-a-lifetime networking opportunity for him to meet investors. He already paid for the whole thing. A heavy, sickening feeling hit the bottom of my stomach. My gut knew what was coming. "What are the exact dates, Mom?" She said it casually, like it was absolutely nothing. Like she wasn't dropping a massive bomb on a year of meticulous planning and thousands of dollars. The week of June 21st. I froze. I stared at the calendar on my wall until the numbers blurred. "Mom, we can't do that. The venue contract is signed. The formal invitations are already out." "He already paid Nathan?" she repeated, her tone instantly losing its fake warmth and turning sharp and pointed. "And you know how incredibly hard it is to get reservations like that at this time of year. Maybe you can just move the wedding. Talk to the venue." There it was, the ultimate demand. It wasn't a polite question. It was a firm correction. I was supposed to shift the biggest, most important day of my life, lose thousands of dollars in deposits, and inconvenience 170 guests, just so my younger brother didn't miss out on a luxury vacation. "I am not moving the wedding, Mom. The deposits are paid. We have planned this for a year." The warmth completely drained from her voice, leaving only cold irritation. "You could have easily picked a date that worked for everyone in this family." "It does work for everyone," I said, my grip on the phone tightening so hard my knuckles popped. "It just doesn't work for Carter's sudden, last-minute vacation." Her inhale was sharp and dramatic. "You always have to make it sound like your brother is doing something wrong. You always have to be so incredibly difficult and stubborn." "I am not being difficult. I am just not moving my wedding date for a ski trip." Silence fell on the line. The heavy, punishing silence my mother used as a weapon to make me feel guilty. Finally, she snapped, "Let me talk to your father," and hung up the phone without another word. The inevitable follow-up call came exactly 2 days later. My father didn't do passive-aggressive sighs. He did absolute verdicts. "Family comes first," Robert said gruffly, skipping any form of greeting. "This is my wedding, Dad," I replied, feeling my pulse pounding hard in my ears. I was at my desk at work, staring at a spreadsheet I suddenly couldn't comprehend. "You are being incredibly selfish," he barked, treating me like a disobedient employee at his dealership. "It is not just a vacation. It is Carter. He is excited. He paid a lot of money. And you? You always want things your way." I wanted to scream. I wanted to list the decades I had folded myself into a tiny, invisible box so Carter could have all the room to shine. I wanted to remind him of my empty college fund. But I just said quietly, "I am not changing the date." I heard a slow, angry exhale on the other end. "If you won't change the date," he said coldly, choosing the words he knew would hurt the most, "maybe this will teach you some humility. Don't expect us to be there." He hung up. I sat in the quiet of my office, feeling a familiar, crushing numbness wash over me. I had been demoted again. I was just the backup plan. I didn't want to accept it. A part of me, the inner child that still desperately wanted my family to be normal and loving, refused to believe they would actually boycott my wedding. So, I reached out to my Uncle Wyatt, my dad's older brother. Wyatt had always been the reasonable one in the family tree. He was the guy who pulled me aside at crowded family barbecues, handed me a soda, and told me he was proud of my hard work and my stable career. I met Wyatt for a beer at a local pub and laid everything out on the table. I told him about the sudden trip. I told him about the insane ultimatum my parents had given me. I told him about the threat of boycotting the wedding if I didn't cancel my plans for Carter. Wyatt looked deeply sympathetic. He shook his head and patted my shoulder reassuringly. "Your dad gets severe tunnel vision when it comes to Carter, Nate. He always has. Look, I will talk to him. We have a big family dinner this coming Sunday. I will bring it up. I won't let him ruin your big day over a ski trip." I felt a massive rush of relief. Finally, an adult in the room. Finally, an ally who saw the blatant unfairness. Sunday dinner arrived. We were all sitting around my parents' massive, expensive mahogany dining table. Carter wasn't there. He was conveniently out with his friends. Chloe sat next to me, squeezing my hand firmly under the table. We were waiting for Wyatt to make his move. Halfway through the roast beef, Wyatt cleared his throat. He looked nervously at my father. "So, Robert, I hear there is a little scheduling conflict with Nathan's wedding and Carter's upcoming trip." My father stopped chewing instantly. He slowly put his silver fork down on his expensive china plate. The temperature in the dining room seemed to plummet 10 degrees. He glared at Wyatt with a look that could cut glass, then locked his cold eyes directly with mine. "There is absolutely no conflict," my father said, his voice dangerously low and commanding. "Nathan knows exactly what this family expects. He knows what he needs to do if he wants his family present at his event. End of discussion." I looked over at Wyatt, waiting for him to step in, waiting for him to stand up for me, to fulfill his promise, to tell my father he was being unreasonable. Wyatt looked down at his plate. He picked up his knife and started cutting his meat with intense focus. He didn't say a single word. He didn't look back up at me. He completely folded under my father's gaze. My mother chimed in smoothly, passing the gravy boat. "It is just a date on a calendar, Nathan. It is really not that deep. You are making a massive mountain out of a tiny molehill. Just call the venue." I stared at Wyatt's bowed head. In that moment, something inside me completely snapped. It wasn't a loud, violent snap. No yelling, no throwing plates, no dramatic speeches. Just the sudden, crystal-clear, painful realization that I was entirely alone in this room. Wyatt wasn't going to save me. No one in this bloodline was going to protect me. I was the designated sacrifice to keep the peace, and they all fully accepted it. "We are leaving," I said calmly. I stood up, pulling Chloe up with me. "Sit down, Nathan," my father commanded, using his CEO voice. "No," I didn't raise my voice. I just looked at him with complete emptiness. "Keep your trip. Keep your money. I will see you when I see you." We walked out of the house. As soon as we got to the car and closed the doors, Chloe turned to me. Her eyes were sharp, calculating, and fully alert. "Nathan," she said, putting the keys in the ignition but not starting the engine. "Your brother does not have a job that pays well enough to drop tens of thousands of dollars on a luxury VIP trip. Your parents are wealthy, but they run a very tight ship with their cash flow for the dealerships. Where exactly did Carter get the liquid money to pay for that trip?" I blinked, confused by the sudden pivot. "I don't know. Dad probably gave it to him from his personal account." "No," Chloe said, shaking her head firmly. "I look at ledgers all day for a living. People like your dad don't just hand over that kind of liquid cash for a vacation without bragging about it to everyone. Something else is going on. Something hidden." She shifted the car into drive. "I am going to find out." Chloe is a financial analyst. She is brilliant with numbers. She doesn't do unofficial investigations the way people do them in dramatic movies, with trench coats, secret meetings in dark parking garages, and stolen hard drives. She does them quietly, meticulously, entirely legally, and without ever showing her hand. The morning after the disastrous dinner with Uncle Wyatt, Chloe sat at our dining table with her laptop, a massive mug of black coffee, and a determined look on her face. She asked me to go into my home office and pull out every single physical document, tax return, and piece of mail I had ever received that was tied to my parents, their businesses, or my family's estate. "I am looking for a thread to pull," she muttered, her eyes scanning lines of data on her screen. I dug through my old metal filing cabinet. I pulled out old W-2s, a scanned letter from years ago regarding my grandmother's funeral arrangements, and a thick stack of confusing tax forms my father had made me sign when I turned 18. He had always told me they were just routine administrative paperwork for the dealerships. In my family, asking to read a document before signing it was treated like an accusation of treason. So, I had always just signed where he pointed. "Here," I said, dropping a dusty manila folder on the table. Chloe started digging. For 3 solid days, she worked her regular demanding job, came home, ate a quick dinner, and dove straight into the paperwork. She cross-referenced public LLC filings tied to my parents' Porsche and Ferrari dealerships. She pulled public property records from the county clerk's website. Then she reached out to Caleb. Caleb was an old college buddy of mine who now worked as a manager at the regional branch of the bank my family used for their primary business accounts. It was a massive gray area, but Chloe framed the call perfectly. She told Caleb it was a routine credit check verification for our upcoming joint mortgage application. She knew exactly what financial jargon to use to get Caleb to verify certain account numbers without raising any red flags or breaking major banking protocols. On Thursday night, I was watching the news in the living room when Chloe walked in from the dining room. Her face was completely pale. She was holding a single printed piece of paper, and her hand was slightly trembling. "Nathan," she said softly, her voice sounding incredibly tight. "Do you remember the inheritance your grandmother left you?" My heart skipped a beat. Years ago, right after my grandmother's funeral, my mother had pulled me aside in the hallway. She told me, almost breezily, that Grandma had set up a small trust fund. For a big life moment, she had said. A wedding, a house, a major promotion. Something important. But I was never allowed to touch it. My father managed it. Whenever I asked about it over the years, he told me it was tied up in long-term investments and not to worry my head about it. "I remember it," I said cautiously, muting the television. "Dad manages it. It's locked up." Chloe sat down next to me on the couch and placed the printed paper directly on my lap. "Not anymore." I stared at the document resting on my knees. It was a bank transfer receipt. Clean, official, and completely devoid of any emotion. It was black and white proof of the ultimate betrayal. Amount: $68,000. Sender: the Eleanor and Robert Family Trust. Subaccount: Nathan. Recipient: Carter. Date: 2 weeks ago. Couldn't breathe. My brain absolutely refused to process the numbers I was seeing. $68,000. I whispered, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. They gave it to Carter? For a ski trip. "It gets much worse," Chloe said, her voice tight with a cold, controlled anger. I checked Carter's social media. I checked the public vehicle registry. "Nathan, Carter is not going on a ski trip to Whistler. There is no luxury chalet. There are no helicopter excursions." I looked up at her, my mind spinning in confusion. Then what did he need the massive amount of money for? Chloe pulled out her phone and swiped to a photo. It was a picture Carter had posted on a private story, one that a mutual friend had screenshotted and quietly sent to Chloe. It was Carter, wearing expensive designer sunglasses, leaning casually against the hood of a brand-new, matte black Lamborghini. The caption read, "Secured the bag. Summer is going to be wild. Big moves only. He used your inheritance as the down payment on a supercar," Chloe stated flatly, pointing at the screen. "He needed cash fast to clear the intense credit check and make the initial deposit. He lied about the ski trip to get your parents to liquidate the fund quickly without raising eyebrows. And your parents just handed it over to him." My hands started to shake violently. The betrayal wasn't just a slap in the face. It was a jagged knife buried deep in my back. My grandmother had loved me. She had left that money for my wedding, for my future, to give me a head start. And my brother had stolen it to buy a shiny toy to impress his rich, superficial friends. "They knew," I said, my voice cracking with a mix of grief and absolute rage. "My parents had to know. Dad controls the accounts. They had to sign the release to transfer the funds." "I have concrete proof they knew," Chloe said softly. She slid another piece of paper toward me. It was a printout of an email thread Caleb had managed to secure from the bank's communication logs regarding the transfer authorization. It was an email directly from Carter to my father. I read the words. They were so incredibly casual, it made me physically sick to my stomach. "Dad, just pull the cash from Nathan's fund. He's got that stable salary from the charity, he doesn't need it right now. I need this car to close a major deal with Julian's network. Just tell Nathan I'm going on a trip or something. He'll probably just move his wedding date anyway, he always caves. He knew it was my money. He took it anyway, and my parents willingly let him. They prioritized his vanity over my future. I am going to kill him, I muttered, standing up abruptly, ready to grab my car keys. No, Chloe said, grabbing my arm firmly, anchoring me in place. If you go over there screaming, they win. They will call you crazy. They will call you ungrateful. They will make you the villain. We don't scream, Nathan. We build a trap. The next day, I texted Carter. I told him I needed to see him urgently. I didn't ask to meet at our parents' house where he could hide behind my mother's apron strings. I picked a high-end, crowded coffee shop downtown, the kind of place where businessmen have loud meetings about stock options and real estate. A public place where he couldn't cause a scene. Carter arrived 20 minutes late, acting like he was doing me a massive favor by showing up. He walked in wearing the exact same designer sunglasses from the photo, keeping them on indoors to look cool. He smirked, slapping me hard on the shoulder as he sat down across from me. Hey bro, what's the massive emergency? You finally coming to your senses about changing the wedding date? He asked, not even looking at me as he flagged down a barista to order a complicated espresso drink. I didn't ease into the conversation. I didn't use my normal, polite, compromising tone. I leaned across the small wooden table, staring right into his hidden eyes. How does the Lamborghini drive, Carter? He froze instantly. The arrogant smirk vanished from his face. His hand hovered over the laminated menu. He slowly lowered his expensive sunglasses, staring at me with genuine shock. What are you talking about? He tried to play dumb, but a nervous, uncontrollable twitch in his jaw completely gave him away. I know all about the $68,000, I said, keeping my voice dangerously low and perfectly steady. I know you took Grandma's money. I know the luxury ski trip was a complete lie. I know you used my inheritance for a sports car. Carter stared at me for a long, tense second. Then, unbelievably, he laughed. A short, arrogant, dismissive scoff. He leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms defiantly. Wow, okay, you hired a private eye or something. Look, Nate, it's really not a big deal. It's family money. Dad said it was totally fine. It wasn't family money, I said, my voice tight with suppressed anger. It was my money, left specifically to me by Grandma. Oh, grow up? Carter sneered, looking around the cafe nervously to see if anyone was listening to our conversation. You are 31. You have a good, stable job. You and Chloe are fine. I needed the massive cash flow to secure a high-value asset. It's an investment in my image. Julian and the guys won't do business with me if I pull up to meetings in a standard Honda. You wouldn't understand how high-level networking and optics work. An investment? I echoed, almost amazed by his sheer delusion and audacity. You literally stole my wedding money for a status symbol. Stop being so dramatic, Carter snapped, true irritation flaring in his eyes. He wasn't ashamed of stealing from me. He was genuinely annoyed that I had caught him and was making a big deal out of it. Look, I will pay it back eventually when my startup hits big. Why are you blowing up the entire family over some cash? Are you really going to ruin everything over this? I am not ruining anything, I said calmly, feeling a cold resolve settle over me. But you need to know this right now. I am not moving my wedding date. Not by a single day. Not by an hour. Carter's eyes narrowed into slits. Then don't expect Mom and Dad to show up. They aren't going to pick your boring little charity worker lifestyle over my future and my potential. Okay. I nodded slowly, accepting the reality. I stood up from the table, dropping a $5 bill for the coffee I didn't even order. Enjoy the car, Carter. I walked out of the coffee shop. The air outside felt sharp and cold, clearing my head. I didn't feel angry anymore. I felt surgical. I pulled out my phone and called Chloe. He admitted it, I told her. Good, she replied instantly. I have got a meeting set up for tomorrow morning. Wear your best suit. Word travels incredibly fast in a toxic family network. By Tuesday evening, there was a soft, hesitant knock on my front door. It was my Aunt Margaret, my mother's sister. Margaret was the family's designated peacekeeper. She was a soft-spoken, seemingly gentle woman who always brought homemade baked goods to gatherings and constantly tried to smooth over the jagged edges of my parents' abusive behavior. I opened the door and let her in. She sat heavily on our living room couch, wringing her hands nervously, looking at me with big, sorrowful, pitying eyes. "Nathan, honey," she started, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. "Your mother called me crying hysterically today. The entire family is tearing apart over this silly wedding date issue. Can't you just be the bigger person? You have always been so mature and understanding. Carter is young, foolish, and impulsive, but your parents truly love you. Don't let stubborn pride ruin your beautiful wedding." I sat in the armchair across from her, feeling a familiar, heavy guilt try to claw its way up my throat. For a second, just a split second, I wondered if I should just cave in like I always did. Maybe I was being too rigid. Chloe was in the kitchen making tea. The open floor plan of our house meant sound carried easily. I heard Chloe's footsteps completely stop. "Margaret," I said gently, trying to explain my side. "Carter stole my inheritance to buy a sports car. They authorized it behind my back." Margaret waved her hand dismissively, as if $68,000 was pocket change. "Money comes and goes, Nathan. Family is forever. If you just push the date back a few months, your father will calm down. He might even pay for the catering. Just apologize for upsetting them, and this will all blow over." I was about to respond when Margaret's phone buzzed loudly in her purse. She pulled it out, glanced at the screen, and her face tightened slightly. "Excuse me, honey. I need to take this. It's the plumber." She stood up quickly and walked down the hallway toward the guest bathroom, closing the door firmly behind her. Chloe walked silently out of the kitchen. She pointed a finger toward the hallway. We crept quietly closer to the door. The wood was thin. We could hear Margaret's voice perfectly clear. She wasn't talking to a plumber. "Eleanor," Margaret hissed into the phone, her soft, sorrowful tone entirely gone, replaced by a sharp, calculating whisper. "I am at his house right now. Yes, I gave him the whole guilt trip speech. He looks totally exhausted. He is wavering. Just hold your ground. If Robert keeps threatening to pull out of the wedding entirely, Nathan will break. He always breaks eventually. Just give it a few more days of silence and he will move the date. Yes, I will make sure he feels guilty enough before I leave." I stood frozen in the hallway. My stomach dropped to the floor. Margaret wasn't a peacekeeper. She was a scout. She was a spy gathering intel for my mother. Chloe grabbed my hand, her grip like a vice. She pulled me away from the door and back into the living room before Margaret came out. When Margaret finally emerged, smiling sweetly and saying her pipes were miraculously fixed, I smiled back. I didn't say a single word about the phone call. I thanked her for coming, walked her to her car, and waved goodbye. As soon as her taillights disappeared down the street, I turned to Chloe. "We burn it down." The next morning, Chloe and I walked into a massive, glass-fronted high-rise office building in downtown Salt Lake City. We weren't meeting with a florist or a wedding planner. We were meeting with Mr. Sterling, a senior partner at a prestigious corporate law firm specializing in estate, trust, and commercial litigation. Mr. Sterling was an imposing man in his 60s who looked like he had never lost an argument in his entire life. He meticulously reviewed the thick stack of documents Chloe had compiled. The bank transfers, Carter's emails, and the tax forms my father had forced me to sign over the years. Sterling adjusted his reading glasses, focusing intently on a specific legal document I had signed when I was 18 years old. "Nathan," Sterling said, his voice grave and serious, "your father explicitly told you this was routine administrative paperwork for his car dealerships?" "Yes, sir," I answered honestly. "He said it was just standard stuff for tax purposes." Sterling leaned back in his heavy leather chair, steepling his fingers. "It wasn't. Your father's Porsche and Ferrari dealerships operate on a massive plot of prime commercial land that was originally owned by your grandmother. When she passed away, she didn't just leave you a cash trust fund. She left you the underlying deed to the commercial real estate that houses your father's entire business. My jaw dropped. The room spun. What? My dad owns the dealerships. He owns the business operations, Sterling corrected sharply. But he leases the land. From you. Or, more accurately, from the trust held in your name. Because you were so young when she died, your father was appointed the executor of the trust. But there is a very strict, ironclad fiduciary clause in this legal agreement. Sterling tapped his expensive pen directly on the bank transfer receipt for the $68,000. This withdrawal to buy your brother a Lamborghini is a blatant, illegal violation of fiduciary duty. By embezzling these specific funds, your father has legally breached the trust agreement. According to the stipulations your grandmother laid out, a breach of this magnitude immediately revokes his executor status and triggers a full default clause. Chloe leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with anticipation. What exactly does the default clause do, Mr. Sterling? Sterling offered a very small, very sharp smile. It means the trust completely dissolves, and full control of all the assets transfers directly to Nathan, including the commercial land. Nathan, you have the absolute legal right to terminate the lease on his dealerships. You can legally evict his business. The room went completely silent. I felt dizzy. For 31 years, my father had treated me like a disappointing employee. He had held money, power, and affection over my head to force my compliance. And the entire time, he was quite literally standing on my ground. We don't file the paperwork yet, Chloe said smoothly, looking at the lawyer with a brilliant plan forming in her eyes. We wait. Wait for what? Sterling asked, raising an eyebrow. For June 21st, I said, my voice hardening into steel. If they want to use my wedding day to teach me humility, I am going to give them a stage. The next few weeks were a masterclass in psychological warfare. My parents went completely silent. No calls, no texts, no emails. They were employing the silent treatment, assuming I was sitting at home panicking. They assumed I would eventually crawl back to them, begging them to attend my wedding, offering to change the date, offering to apologize for being difficult. I didn't call. I didn't text. I focused entirely on the wedding. We finalized the catering, the flowers, the seating chart. We deliberately placed my parents' reserved seats at the very front row, directly in the line of sight of every single guest. The night before the wedding, I stood on the balcony of our hotel room, looking out at the dark mountains. The storm was coming, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of the rain. June 21st, 2025, finally arrived. The morning was absolutely beautiful. The kind of clear, crisp mountain day in Park City that looks like it belongs on a postcard. The outdoor terrace was set up perfectly. We had white wooden chairs lined up in neat rows, pale floral arrangements that moved gently in the mountain breeze, and a stunning view of the valley below. As I stood at the altar, looking out at the 170 guests taking their seats, I saw them, my parents. They actually showed up. They walked down the aisle to their reserved seats in the very front row. My mother wore a dress that was a little too bright, a little too attention-grabbing. My father wore his expensive custom suit, looking around the venue with a critical eye, judging the flower arrangements and the catering staff. Carter was not with them. He was supposedly on his luxury trip, though I knew he was probably just driving his new Lamborghini around the city, trying to impress people who didn't actually care about him. The string quartet started playing. Chloe walked down the aisle. She took my breath away. In that moment, looking at her, the stress of the past year melted. I forgot about the stolen inheritance. I forgot about the empty college fund. I forgot about my family's toxic games. I just wanted to marry the woman I loved. The officiant began the ceremony. He spoke about love, partnership, and building a foundation of mutual respect. We exchanged our rings. We were literally seconds away from saying our final vows. The venue was completely silent, everyone hanging on our words. And then it happened. My father stood up. He didn't stand up quietly. He didn't try to be discreet. He pushed his heavy wooden chair back against the stone patio with a loud, violent scrape that echoed across the entire terrace. Every single head turned. The officiant stopped mid-sentence, his mouth hanging open. My mother stood up right next to him. She smoothed down her expensive dress, her lips pressed into a tight, practiced line. My father turned to face me. He completely ignored the 170 guests staring at him. He looked at me like I was a stubborn, disobedient child throwing a tantrum in a grocery store. Maybe one day, my father said loudly, his deep voice carrying over the mountain breeze, you will finally understand what humility means. We are leaving. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. I saw Chloe's parents in the second row, their faces frozen in absolute shock. I saw my Uncle Wyatt looking down at his shoes, entirely useless. My father turned around and started walking down the center aisle. My mother followed right behind him. They were making a massive, deliberate scene. They wanted everyone to see their exit. They wanted everyone to know that they disapproved of me, that I had failed them, that I was the bad son. They wanted to ruin the happiest moment of my life to punish me for not bowing to Carter's demands. I stood there at the altar. My hands were cold, but they did not shake. I didn't cry. I didn't run after them. I didn't beg them to stay. I just watched them walk away until they disappeared inside the resort lobby. I turned back to Chloe. She was looking at me, her eyes blazing with a fierce, protective fire. I squeezed her hands. Let's get married, I said. The officiant swallowed hard, recovered his composure, and we finished the ceremony. We kissed. The crowd cheered a little too loudly to compensate for the awkwardness, and we walked back down the aisle as husband and wife. At the cocktail hour, people tried their best to act normal. They congratulated us, they drank champagne, they avoided mentioning my parents the exact same way people avoid mentioning a fatal car crash. I smiled. I shook hands. I let my happiness exist in the exact same space as the public humiliation. I refused to let my father own the tone of my wedding day. But inside, the countdown had started. That brings us right back to the reception. The moment Chloe took the microphone. The moment the ballroom went dead quiet. My parents had walked back into the reception hall, standing by the double doors with their arms crossed. They wanted to witness the fallout. They wanted to see me broken and embarrassed. Instead, they walked straight into the trap we had spent weeks building. You saw Nathan's parents walk out earlier today, Chloe said, pointing at them. You saw them try to humiliate him. You deserve to know the real reason why. The projector screen dropped. The bank document appeared. Huge black numbers on a bright white screen. Amount, $68,000. Recipient, Carter. Sender, the Eleanor and Robert Family Trust. My father's smug expression vanished. He took a step forward, his face turning an angry shade of red. Turn that off, he shouted across the room. Turn that screen off right now. This is private family business. Chloe ignored him completely. She held the microphone steady. Nathan's parents didn't boycott this wedding because of a simple scheduling conflict over a ski trip. They boycotted it because Nathan refused to cancel his wedding so his brother could steal his inheritance to buy a sports car. The whispers erupted. 170 guests turned to look at my parents. The judgment in the room was palpable, a heavy, suffocating weight. Chloe clicked a button on a remote. The slide changed. It was the screenshot of Carter's email to my father. Dad, just pull the cash from Nathan's fund. He's got that stable salary from the charity, he doesn't need it right now. I need this car to close a major deal. He'll probably just move his wedding date anyway, he always caves. Someone near the front row let out a loud scoff of pure disgust. My Uncle Wyatt looked sick to his stomach. My mother, Eleanor, was practically hyperventilating, grabbing my father's sleeve. That is a lie, my mother shrieked, her voice cracking under the pressure. Nathan is a liar. He is trying to ruin his brother's reputation. It is a certified bank record, Eleanor. A deep, calm voice cut through the chaos. Everyone turned toward the head table. Mr. Sterling, our lawyer, stood up. He wasn't dressed like a guest. He was wearing a sharp, dark legal suit. He held a thick leather briefcase in his hand. He walked slowly to the center of the dance floor, standing right next to Chloe. "Who the hell are you?" my father demanded, pointing a shaking finger at Sterling. "My name is Arthur Sterling. I am a senior partner at Sterling and Hayes, specializing in trust and estate litigation," the lawyer said, his voice projecting easily without a microphone. "And I represent Nathan." My father took a step back, as if he had been physically struck. "Represent him for what? It was family money. I am the executor." "You were the executor," Sterling corrected sharply. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of legal papers. "By authorizing the embezzlement of $68,000 from a protected trust for the purchase of a luxury vehicle, you blatantly violated your fiduciary duty. You broke the law, Robert. Plain and simple." The entire ballroom was completely silent. You could hear the ice melting in the water glasses. "I can spend that money however I see fit for the family," my father yelled, but his voice lacked its usual booming authority. It sounded desperate. Panic was setting in. "No, you cannot," Sterling replied calmly. "And because you breached the trust agreement, the default clause has been officially triggered. As of 9 a.m. yesterday morning, the trust was legally dissolved. Full control of all assets has transferred solely to Nathan." My mother sneered. "So what? He gets a few $1,000s left in the account. Keep it. We don't care." Sterling looked at my mother with a mixture of pity and sheer coldness. "Eleanor, you clearly did not read the original deed when Robert's mother passed away. The trust doesn't just hold cash. The trust owns the commercial real estate that houses your entire auto dealership network. The land your Porsche and Ferrari showrooms sit on. It belongs to Nathan." My father stopped breathing. He actually staggered backward, bumping into a waiter holding a tray of champagne. Glasses crashed to the floor, shattering into pieces, but nobody even flinched. They were all staring at my father. "That's impossible," my father whispered, the blood completely draining from his face. "That's my business. I built that business." "You built the inventory," Sterling corrected, "but you leased the land, and your new landlord is your son. The son you just tried to publicly humiliate. Nathan has instructed my firm to terminate your commercial lease effective immediately. You have 30 days to vacate the premises, remove your inventory, and hand over the keys. If you do not, we will seize the vehicles as collateral for unpaid rent." The silence in the room transformed into sheer shock. My parents' entire empire, their status, their wealth, the foundation they used to make everyone else feel small. It was all gone, wiped out by a single arrogant decision to buy their golden child a Lamborghini. My father looked like a man who had just stepped on a landmine and heard the click. He looked at me sitting at the head table. For the first time in my entire life, 31 years of existence, my father looked at me with genuine fear. "Nathan," he choked out, holding his hands up. "Nathan, son, let's talk about this privately. We can work this out. We are family." I looked at him. I thought about the empty college fund. I thought about the years of being sidelined. I thought about the phone call where he told me he wouldn't come to my wedding over a ski trip. "You walked out of my wedding," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried across the quiet room. "You told me you were going to teach me humility. Consider the lesson learned. Now get out." My mother burst into genuine tears. Not her fake, manipulative tears. Real, terrified sobs. She tried to run toward me, her arms outstretched. "Nathan, please. Your brother. The business. Everything we have." "Security," Chloe said clearly into the microphone. 2 large security guards, whom we had specifically hired and briefed for this exact scenario, stepped out from the hallway. They flanked my parents. "Sir, ma'am, it is time to leave," the taller guard said firmly, gesturing toward the exit. My father looked around the room. He looked at his brother, Wyatt, who actively turned his head away to avoid eye contact. He looked at his friends, his neighbors, his business associates who had been invited to the wedding. They were all staring at him with pure disgust. His reputation was completely destroyed. The mask of the wealthy, respectable businessman was shattered on the floor. He grabbed my mother's arm, pulling her back. Defeated, humiliated, and completely broken, Robert and Eleanor walked out of the ballroom doors. The heavy doors clicked shut behind them. The room stayed quiet for a long moment. Then, Chloe put the microphone back on the stand. She walked over to me, pulled me out of my chair, and kissed me. The crowd erupted. It wasn't polite applause this time. It was a massive, roaring cheer. The band kicked back in, playing the most upbeat song on their set list. The tension evaporated from the room like steam. The dark cloud that had hovered over my entire life was finally gone. The rest of the reception was a blur of genuine joy. People danced, they drank, they laughed. Several of my relatives came up to me, apologizing profusely, telling me they had absolutely no idea how bad things were behind closed doors. Even Uncle Wyatt pulled me aside, looking deeply ashamed, and told me I was a braver man than he would ever be. I thanked him politely, but I knew our relationship would never be the same. I didn't need his protection anymore. When the night finally ended, when the last guest had taken the shuttle back to their hotel, Chloe and I went up to our bridal suite. The room was quiet. The moonlight spilled across the floor. I took off my tuxedo jacket and sat on the edge of the bed. Chloe sat down next to me, resting her head on my shoulder. "We did it," she whispered. I nodded. And then, entirely without warning, I started to cry. I didn't sob loudly, but the tears just fell freely. I wasn't crying because I was sad. I wasn't mourning the loss of my parents. I was crying because of the sheer, overwhelming relief. I was crying for the little boy who had waited tables to pay for college while his brother traveled Europe. I was crying for the young man who had accepted scraps of affection and called it love. The heavy, suffocating backpack of guilt and obligation I had carried for 3 decades had just been unclipped and dropped on the floor. "I'm free," I said, my voice thick with emotion. Chloe wrapped her arms around me tightly. "You are. And nobody is ever going to make you feel small again." We set our absolute boundaries that night. No negotiations. No mediations. We were cutting the rot out completely. 6 months passed. Time jump. Life has a funny way of rewarding you when you finally stand up for yourself. My career at the education charity took off. Without the constant, draining background noise of my family's drama, I was able to focus entirely on my work. I secured a massive national grant for our program. My boss pulled me into her office and offered me a major promotion to regional director. My salary practically doubled. Chloe and I started looking at houses in a beautiful, quiet neighborhood far away from Park City. We were thriving. My parents, on the other hand, were living a nightmare entirely of their own making. Mr. Sterling did not play games. He filed the eviction notices precisely on time. My father tried to fight it in court, burning through thousands of dollars in legal fees he couldn't afford, only to have the judge throw his case out. The law was the law. The fiduciary breach was undeniable. Without the prime commercial land, my father had nowhere to put his massive inventory of luxury cars. He scrambled to find a new commercial lease, but commercial real estate in that area was astronomical. The Porsche and Ferrari corporate offices caught wind of the eviction and the legal scandal. Luxury car brands hate bad PR. They revoked my father's distribution licenses. He had to liquidate his entire inventory at a massive loss just to cover his debts. The dealerships closed down. The large house they lived in was suddenly too expensive to maintain. And Carter's startup completely failed because it never actually existed. It was just an excuse to network and party. When the bank realized Carter had no stable income and the trust fund was gone, they repossessed the matte black Lamborghini right out of my parents' driveway. It was a spectacular fall from grace. The stress was so bad I heard rumors from a cousin that my parents were constantly screaming at each other. The word divorce casually thrown around the house like a weapon. They were fighting over the custody of the few assets they had left. I didn't reach out. I didn't gloat. I just lived my life. Then, The doorbell rang on a rainy Tuesday evening. I opened the front door and stopped cold. Robert and Eleanor stood on my porch. They looked 10 years older. My father's expensive suit was slightly wrinkled. My mother wasn't wearing her usual heavy jewelry. They looked exhausted, defeated, and completely desperate. My mother was holding a small, pathetic-looking pie from a grocery store bakery. "Nathan," my mother said, her voice cracking immediately, "please, just let us inside. We just want to talk to our son." I looked at them. A year ago, this sight would have triggered intense panic and guilt. Now I just felt a cold indifference. I didn't step aside. I stood blocking the doorway. "Make it quick," I said. My father swallowed hard. His pride was completely shattered. "Nathan, we made a mistake. Terrible, terrible mistake. We were blind. Carter manipulated us. We see that now. We want our family back. We miss you. We want to apologize for everything." My mother started crying, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. "We are so sorry, honey. We just want to fix this. We want to be a family again." Sounded so incredibly sincere. It sounded exactly like the apology I had waited 31 years to hear. Chloe walked up behind me. She looked over my shoulder at my parents. She didn't look angry. She looked amused. "Are you apologizing because you are actually sorry?" Chloe asked smoothly. "Or are you apologizing because the bank sent you a notice of foreclosure on your residential home yesterday morning?" My father flinched. My mother's crying stopped instantly. Chloe had kept an eye on public financial filings. She knew everything. "Your business is bankrupt, Robert. You leveraged your primary home to pay off the inventory debt, and now you are defaulting on the mortgage. You aren't here for a family reunion. You are here because you need Nathan to sign a guarantor release form to use his commercial land as collateral for a new bank loan." The silence on the porch was deafening. The fake apology evaporated into thin air. My father looked down at the welcome mat. He couldn't even meet my eyes. My mother stared at the cheap pie in her hands. It was twist number 3, right on my front porch. They hadn't changed at all. They hadn't learned a single lesson. They were just out of money, out of options, and looking for their reliable backup plan to bail them out one last time. I looked at my father, the man who had terrorized me, controlled me, and tried to humiliate me in front of everyone I loved. He was small now, just a desperate man facing the consequences of his own arrogance. "You told me you wanted to teach me humility," I said, my voice incredibly calm. "You told me that family comes first, but you only meant your family, Carter and Eleanor. I was never in that circle. I was just the bank. I was just the safety net." "Nathan, please," my father whispered, finally looking up. "We will lose the house. Then you will lose the house," I replied without a shred of hesitation. "You made your choices. You stole my grandmother's gift. You prioritized a sports car over my wedding. You walked out on me. Now you have to live with the fallout. I am not signing anything. I am not bailing you out. We are done." My mother let out a loud, dramatic wail, dropping the pie on the porch where it smashed into pieces. "You are a monster. You are abandoning your own blood." "Goodbye, Eleanor," I said. "Goodbye, Robert." I stepped back inside my warm, safe home. I looked my father right in the eye, and I closed the heavy oak door. I turned the deadbolt. Click. It was the loudest, most satisfying sound I have ever heard in my life. The absolute finality of it. They stood on the porch for 10 minutes, knocking and crying, but we didn't answer. Eventually, we heard their car engine start, and they drove away into the rain. They never came back. On some days, when it's really quiet in the house, I still hear my father's booming voice echoing in my memory. "Maybe this will teach you humility." He said it like he was handing down some ancient sacred life lesson from the mountaintop. But his definition of humility was totally wrong. His version of humility meant letting people take from you just to keep the peace. His version meant bowing your head, shrinking yourself down, and swallowing your own needs so someone else could feel important. That is not humility. Humility is realizing that you can be loved without having to shrink. It is understanding that being a calm, reasonable person does not mean you have to be compliant when someone is abusing you. If someone can only stand your presence when you are bending over backward for them, they never actually loved you at all. They just loved the convenient shape you made when you stayed quiet. Chloe and I still have our beautiful wedding photos hanging in our hallway. The mountain terrace, the clear sky, the bright sunlight. In one wide shot of the ceremony, you can clearly see the exact moment my parents' reserved chairs are empty in the front row. People sometimes come over, see that photo, and ask if it ruined my wedding day. They ask if I carry trauma from having my parents walk out on me during my vows. I always tell them the absolute truth. My parents tried to turn my wedding into a massive punishment. They tried to break my spirit by leaving, but all they did was give me the greatest wedding gift I could have ever asked for. They gave me a clean, sharp line between who I was and who they desperately wanted me to be. And when my incredible wife stood up in that reception hall, grabbed the microphone, and the entire room went dead quiet, it wasn't humiliation I felt. It was pure, unadulterated relief. Because for the very first time in my 31 years of life, I wasn't the only person holding the truth. Thank you for sticking around and listening to my story. I hope this resonated with you in some way, especially if you have ever felt like the backup plan in your own family. Sometimes walking away is the strongest thing you can possibly do. Have you ever found yourself in a similar situation? How did you handle the toxic dynamics in your life? Let me know down below. Now, if you are still here, listening to my voice right now, you belong to a very special group. I want you to go down to the comments and type the letter W for winner. This is our secret code for the 1% Club, the amazing group of people who actually watch a video all the way to the very end. When I see that W, I know exactly who my true supporters are. If my journey connected with you today, please do me a massive favor and hit that like button. Make sure you follow and subscribe to the channel so we can keep hanging out and sharing more stories together. Stay strong, keep your boundaries firm, and I will see you in the next one.